Hello, people. I just decided to kind of hop on today and just have a discussion because there's so much going on that I think it's not something that we need to kind of wait until basically December to have this conversation. I think this is a conversation we kind of need to have while it's fresh in people's minds. So the first thing I want to talk about is basically, well, before I even get into that, I'm joined today by Brandon from Project Sanity. And what was the other show? Go ahead and introduce yourself and talk about the other show, Brandon.
Which other show? Oh, Politics and Grits. We're launching a new show with me, Anoa, and Benjamin Dixon. Sunday from, and of course, Dave Grossman. Sunday from 10 to 12. It's a bit more casual.
Okay. Yeah, I think I caught the first episode. I liked it, and I just didn't want to murder the name by me saying it, so I'll definitely refer to somebody who's actually on the show, right?
Yeah.
What about the late show? Is that going to be a thing that you guys do, or no?
I don't know. I'm on a lot of shows, man. I can't remember them all. I'm for some reason the worst host on the Progressive Army is on the most shows.
Oh man, here we go. I want to talk about what happened on election night.
Oh,
and God. Yeah, we have to go back through that. And the reason why we got to go back through it is because there's all this stuff out there, and the usual people that didn't see it coming, now they all have, this special insight, this new knowledge where, they've been wrong all the way up until this point, and now they just continue to be wrong and they don't lose any credibility. So I think at this point we have to kind of acknowledge that they really just don't know what they're talking about in large part. And that should be clear that they just don't know what they're talking about. And when I say the pundit class, I mean the people that are on CNN, people that are on, NBC and all these other hosts that, felt like it was okay for the progressive cause or even the liberal cause to be tied to Hillary Clinton. They're trying to, force everybody to just accept what they wanted. And it's so obvious that a large number of people just flat out rejected that. And they were dumbfounded. They didn't even understand why. How could this happen? How could someone like Donald Trump win? And instead of looking inward and saying, well, maybe there's something wrong with us, they instead want to blame everybody but themselves. And I think that's a huge problem. So now we find ourselves in this strange sort of situation. What does Donald Trump's presidency mean? How do you prepare for something like that? And, everybody's talking about, of course, all the great damage that he can do with his transition team and the people that are encircling him and the people that backed him from day one and didn't dare, back down when other people tried to shame them for it. We're talking about the people like Sheldon Adelson. They got behind Donald Trump and said, no, we're going to get behind him. And that's it. They basically bet and they won. They won big. So you can't say that they're not going to reap the benefits of that bet. And at the same time, people know where the political winds have shifted. He's won. He has the power. So there's going to be everybody flocking to him, just like they would flock to Hillary Clinton for favors and deals and all that nature. So it's a spoiled system. So with that spoiled system, we kind of have to realize, okay, there's damage that can be done, but just abstract from all of that for a second. And let's think about there's other dangers. And these dangers are the ones fomented by the Democrats. I just had a brain fart. No, I was joking. These dangers are fomented by the Democrats. This is like, they basically sold Trump as the end of the world and that we have to all march together or else black people are going to be put back in chains and you'll have them out there picking cotton with iPhones and, all the Muslims will be locked away in concentration camps. And he was going to have, the military marching in the street and institute martial law to shut down all dissent. And there won't be any way to dissent from a Donald Trump presidency. That is what they fearmongered with. So I want to be clear that when you fearmonger like that, you put your credibility on the line when what you're fearmongering against comes to fruition. But all the things that you said would happen don't happen. Put on top of that all the things that you said before you even ran for election. None of that stuff materialized into your win. There's a real danger here. What if, for like it or not, what if Donald Trump gets in there and I'm not saying this necessarily will go this way. I'm not saying hoping that it goes this way. I'm not even saying I support Donald Trump. What I'm saying is, what if he gets in there and he does a few simple things? He promotes some sort of corporate-friendly jobs bill that helps out people. He doesn't just, overhaul and do all this crazy stuff. He just kind of, toys with things around the edges. But all the while he's doing these things, he's also doing, the mainstream Republican agenda, ignoring climate change for the most part and whatever else. But what if he does those few things that I outlined at the very beginning? Some corporate-friendly things that do help some people. If he does those things, if people feel like their lives got better because of a Donald Trump presidency, right or wrong, the Democrats may be finished. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, I would add to that even if people don't feel like their lives have gotten markedly worse, a real threat as well. With all this fear mongering about the end of the world, all this fear mongering about the nuclear holocaust that's going to occur, Trump is going to keep his populist promises, but I don't think he's going to keep his sort of his authoritarian promises either. I don't think he's going to disband the EPA or the FDA. I think those were large. I don't think he's going to build a wall. I don't think that his strategy towards that much different sort of at the policy level than Obama's has been. So if you drum up all this fear and people's lives don't actually get markedly worse, you run that risk of having people sort of confuse their lives not getting worse with their lives getting better. And
there might be a chance that with some sort of corporate friendly jobs program, some people's lives will get better. If that's what they do. Now, this may be the very same jobs program that Barack Obama wanted to get through. It might be, but they didn't give it to him, and now they got it. And the only people you have to blame for that is Democrats. It's not the Republicans' fault. They played their hand, and look at where they are. They are in control of everything. They want it all. And Democrats had, pretty much a winning hand, and they threw it all away. On Hillary Clinton, on neoliberalism, because at some point when you're in government and you're a politician, you have to produce some sort of result. And when Barack Obama came in and they had supermajority, had both houses, they didn't really produce any results. They didn't increase the quality of life for a large section of people. Now you can say it was because of obstruction and all of this, but I've already went through a long list of some of the things the Obama administration did and the Democrats did. And a lot of the stuff that they did was very, very pro-corporate. And yet anything that, had to do with people, it just didn't make it through, and I'm not one of those people that's going to be stuck trying to defend Obamacare, because while I've said this a million times, while Obamacare was change, it wasn't necessarily progress. It's a huge mixed bag. So I'm not going to really defend it as a monolithic piece.
I think that's a really good point, though. I think that the difference between change and progress is not something that we often talk about in the mainstream media. And I think that that's really key to understanding why Trump won, because he offered change. He wasn't. You can't sway people with the status quo. You can't sway people with inevitability, especially if the status quo has left a large amount of America impoverished. I think what's the stat? 70% of Americans make under $50,000 a year. Large swaths of the population are poor. Even the black middle class is precariously perched on like the edge of poverty. Like one paycheck and one missed paycheck, sudden loss of their job, and they're just done. They're going to fall right into poverty. And Trump offered change, and a lot of people, when the status quo has failed them, they will take any kind of change. And that is a real danger that the Democratic establishment put forth for people, that, hey, anything is better than this. And the question becomes, well, isn't Hillary Clinton objectively better than Trump? And it's like, yeah, but for most people, they're thinking subjectively. They're thinking about, well, I can't feed my kids in 2 weeks. Is the FDA going to exist? Is the EPA going to exist? They're thinking, well, the system has failed me. It's failed me in the short term.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with that. We have to remember that people have a tendency to give a kinder eye to people that they generally identify with, that they like. And in politics, just because you like someone doesn't mean you don't give them a critical look. And what I mean when I say critical look, people often tell me you shouldn't expect that from him because X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, no, it's because I find myself aligning with him that I'm actually going to be more critical, and I want him to do better, because I understand that not everybody's looking at him with the same kind eye that I'm looking at him with. People are actually looking at him and they see these flaws, and it's best for them to correct them. When people look at Barack Obama, they see eight years of their lives just not getting better, as a slow slide, a slow drag where they're not doing anything. And for all the great change that he promised, that really just didn't materialize for them. They were largely left out of that. And that's the experience that really stretches, just like you said, to a large portion of the population, not just, angry white voters like they would have you believe. And what I'll say about that is, yes, did angry white voters vote Republican? Yes. But we should also remember that angry white people have always voted Republican. The angry white racist voter has always voted Republican. They've always courted that vote. That's how it's always has been. So we shouldn't be trying to make it seem like it's a surge and it's coming up out of nowhere and it's never been here before. It's the same thing it's always been. The only thing is the TV, the media institutions are now shining a light on it and showing it for all the world to see. Whatever their motive is, that's what they're doing.
Although I would push back. I mean, I keep hearing this, or rather I kept hearing this one phrase during the election. Not every Trump voter is a racist, but every racist is a Trump voter. And I was like, no. Kissinger's voting for Clinton. Okay, that's one right there.
Yeah.
There are plenty of racists who are voting for Hillary Clinton because they're more corporatist than they are racist. They just have racist, sexist. They have a plethora of motivations for how they vote. So do I think the majority of racists voted for Donald Trump, a virulent racist? That's hard. That's hard to say. I know some of the most dangerous racists, some of the most dangerous neoliberals voted for Clinton. I know that to be a fact. And she was proud. She was proud of that. That was something she was proud of.
And when we're talking about racism, we're talking about in all of its forms, not just targeted here for, the black people or the Muslims that live within the borders of the United States. We're talking about an international level, especially when you're talking about Kissinger, because he was no friend to anybody that wasn't, white, basically, in the world arena. And I think that's really racism. That's what it is. And when we think about racism, we need to also include that international aspect. What do we do to other people all around the world that, are largely not white?
And what do we allow to be done to them? Like, honestly, it's not just what we do. It's like, what do we prevent from occurring to them? Or what do we have a hand in? The disinvestment from the third to a lot of these problems, not just racism, but sexism. What kind of sexism do we allow to occur in places like Iran as the result of our sanctions? Or how do we allow minorities to bear the brunt of our geopolitical agenda in these countries? There have been plenty of studies that show that the sanctions started on Iran have been disproportionately harsh on women there, on women and children. And then you have a candidate who's, talking more the same for other countries in the Middle East, but who's touted as this sort of feminist, this new age Margaret Thatcher. I'm sorry, no one would make that comparison positively, but that's what she was, Margaret Thatcher for 2016. And I think a lot of people, especially in the media, were ready to have this kind of intro to sociology, intellectual circle jerk, where they were going to say, well, the thing with Obama, is Obama a anti-racist icon? Is Margaret Thatcher a feminist icon? Is Hillary Clinton a feminist icon? And it's like, well, no, not if you really understand the causes for these problems, not if you really understand the structural causes for why sexism. And so my pushback, and not to take over your conversation, was Hillary Clinton is only going to make sexism worse. Just like President Obama only made racism worse, and not simply by being a prominent black figure. as income inequality, as unequal access to resources expands, people take it out on each other. Without changing the structural conditions of these countries, letting it become worse, racism just expands. And the Democrats were never offering, whether under Clinton or Obama, a comprehensive plan to fight racism. They were just offering a better face for it.
Well, let's actually take a second. I see a lot of people are mentioning something that I also want to talk about when I said about the great damage that Donald Trump can do with the people in his cabinet. And the argument that I'm going to make about that is, yes, the people in that cabinet are problematic. However, did anyone take some time to look at, what Hillary Clinton's transition team was looking like and the members that were a part of that cabinet? They weren't really better in a material sense. So yes, you get some crazy out there racists or whatever, or some crazy misogynists, but you have these corporate neocons that were aligning with Clinton, and they're just not better. They're just literally not better in terms from a people's standpoint, right? From what we need and what they were both just lacking. So, even if you talk about climate change, the Democrats haven't done anything about climate change. They had a supermajority. They didn't do anything about climate change. They basically said, we believe in it, but there's nothing we can do. Hillary Clinton, before even running into the general election in the primary, towards the end, she said that, climate change legislation is already off the table. What does that mean? Well, how can you say that you believe in climate change, but you don't want to do nothing about it? You can't. What good are you doing? You're not doing anything. You might as well deny it and move on, because that's what your actions are doing.
Let's be honest. The Democrats think we're stupid. I think that, or rather that we have no other options. And I say we, meaning black voters, working class voters, poor white voters, female voters. They treat us like we're a given, and they run for that weird demographic of people who they feel like have a choice, which is upper middle class white people, upper middle class white males, upper middle class white females. That's who they run for, because they feel as though, well, they don't have a choice. They simply don't have a choice. And let's even look at who they're trying to run in 2020 already. Cory Booker, Kirsten Gillibrand, probably Clinton again. Like all these people who it's not that they haven't learned their lesson. It's just that they think that we are stuck with them. And I think one of the dangers of Trump is people embodying that, people letting that fear make us stuck with them, just to have something different.
A viewer brought
and I'm hoping that we
go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I'll finish that.
I'm hoping people use this time to get rid, to oust the neoliberals from the Democratic Party, and they don't let the neoliberals use Trump as a weapon to make liberals or the left or most people beg for the yoke of neoliberal policies again, because anything is better than Trump.
Yeah, like to me at this point, neoliberalism is bankrupt. They're living on borrowed time, and we do not. And I've already put this on my Twitter. Progressives, radicals, leftists, whatever you want to call yourself, we all know that right now we need to battle for the narrative. We need to battle for the thoughts and ideas, and make sure that we don't tie our future to neoliberalism. We need to let that go off in the corner somewhere and die. If the right is going to beat it, or if it's just going to beat itself, or if it's just going to, slowly just die off on its own, I don't know. I don't know what has to happen there, but we should be building something separate from that it does not align with that whatsoever. And that's something that I really want everyone, if you could, just take some time to really think about what that means. That means people who are taking, corporate money, people that are voting against the social safety net, people that vote against the 4 pillars of the New Deal, all of those people that are cutting public pensions, people that are destroying the parks, expanding, oil drilling on the public commons, people who are doing those things, we do not need to support them under any circumstances, because they're doing us no good. When we stand with them, all we do is weaken ourselves. We weaken ourselves, and it really just kind of forfeits like having a future narrative that's separate from them, so we can use to actually just get rid of them altogether, because we're tying ourselves to them. It's almost like something's heavy is sinking in the water, and you just tied your leg to it. It's pulling you down with it.
Well, I have a question. I mean, from your opinion, does it make me a bad person that I'm a little bit happy that Clinton was unable to motivate people simply by fear mongering and existing as a female, regardless of her other problematic identities? Like, is it bad of me to go, well, you know what? At least people are sort of waking up to this idea that there is more to. I don't know how much they are. But there's more to being a Democrat than having a D by your name. You actually had, from my perspective, a lot of what cost to the election was President Obama's problematic policies and actions, not simply his rhetoric. I think that if we were just relying on President Obama's rhetoric and we weren't living in the information age and we didn't have so many Latinos, especially Mexican immigrants whose family members were deported by President Obama, like sort of waking up to this notion that the Democrats are not necessarily on their side simply because the Republicans are not on their side, that we would have seen a much bigger turnout for her. But I think a large portion of America, especially millennials, taken to Twitter, taken to Google, taken to Wikipedia, and just looked up their records, like have sort of tuned out of the mainstream media and are now simply just doing the research for themselves and going, okay, well, this person I can't trust. And just to finish that question, and a lot of people now, especially millennials, and I know some people think this is a mark against them, but I think it's actually a good thing, have moral red lines in the sand that you simply can't cross. Like they're not willing to negotiate on the Patriot Act. They're not willing to negotiate on illegal wars. They're not willing to negotiate on plan that's not single payer. And if you're not in favor of that, they can't be in favor of you.
Yeah, I definitely believe that what you're describing is what I talk about all the time, is that people have to be militant. They have to be willing to say, no, we're not going to support you under any circumstances. You're going to come to us. And how does that happen? It happens by saying, I'm not going to support you unless you are here. And if enough people are there, they will move there, or they won't win election, or you'll find somebody else who will move there. That's the way it works. Once you start saying, well, I really want this, but it's really not possible to get that, so I have to just settle for this because nobody's perfect. And it seems so reasonable, right? All you have to do is just accept what's already there, and that's how progress works. You just have to always accept the best choice of what's put in front of you, and that's your freedom. But that's just an illusion. There's nothing theoretically saying that you have to choose the best choice between the two that you have in front of you. There's more choices, and if something's not there, perhaps it's better that you try to build something be there for people that want. Perhaps it's better to build something so that it's there for people who think like you, and you can actually have something, and you can exercise more control over those choices that you do have.
Well, I think that, this is an important point that we have to make. There's a difference between being a purist, being an ideological purist for whom no one will satisfy you, to being someone who has realistic expectations and also hard limits. So I think that from my perspective, and I'm sure, and I'm going to preempt and preemptively say this is your perspective as well, Bernie Sanders was someone who I was settling for. Like from a policy standpoint, Bernie Sanders was what I consider to be incremental change. Bernie Sanders for me was, okay, this is where I think the mainstream left should be. Not necessarily, or rather where I would like it to go. I would have liked a more radical candidate than Bernie Sanders on certain parts of issues. Like, I think that he could have been more militant on certain issues. I think he could have spoken to, a universal income, like basic universal income for the United States. I think he could have spoken to these things that countries in the actual Scandinavian countries have, not actual, but the Scandinavian have, that people attributed to him, when honestly he was where the left was 60 years ago. He was where the left was 50 years ago. He was where the left was. Like, he didn't, my point is that Bernie Sanders didn't change. He didn't get more radical as he got older. The left changed. The mainstream Democratic Party changed, and they got more and more right wing. And so for people acting as though, although there is a wing now we've seen on Twitter who have adopted as a reaction to this election a more purist standpoint, like no one's good enough for anyone now because they're hurting. But Bernie Sanders had his flaws. Bernie Sanders had his flaws. He wasn't as left wing as I would have liked, but he was the change I wanted to see in the Democratic Party. He was a good step in the right direction, and I hope that people take that seriously and don't succumb to a purist mentality now that we've seen a totally corrupt candidate. We can't go too far in the other direction. I'm saying we had an incredibly corrupt neoliberal candidate, Hillary Clinton. No one can deny that. She didn't lose because of sexism. She lost because she was corrupt and people didn't like her, not because she was a woman, but because she was corrupt. But let's not make an angel out of Bernie Sanders. He was the better of the two, but he was like, if given the option between him and a more left candidate, I would have chosen someone to the left of Bernie Sanders immediately.
Yeah, like what struck me as strange is I was talking to somebody and I told them that I was to the left of Bernie Sanders, and they looked at me like I was crazy, because in America, the spectrum has shifted so far to the right that they believe that Bernie Sanders is as left as you can go and still exist, and that anything other than that is just crazy. And when that's not the truth at all. Like, I agree, Bernie Sanders in a large part is a centrist. And when I viewed his candidacy, I was viewing it as a stepping stone. Like, we need to get here and improve people's lives with these policies and build up support to move further and tackle some things that we also should be doing. And this is what I'll talk about. A lot of times with the elite liberals, this is what you'll see. You'll see people that long for the New Deal, but hate anything that actually will lead us in that direction. Like, they like the New Deal and they liked it, but every time someone says, well, we need to organize outside the Democratic Party because the Democrats aren't giving us something, they'll say, no, you can't do that because then Republicans will win. And it's just like, well, if you really want the New Deal, we have to be willing to do things that are going to get us there. And if you're not willing to do things that are going to get us there, you're not really after the goal that you said you're after. You're doing something totally different. Well, you're serving a purpose that's totally different.
That's true, but I think that, and there's also this tendency to be hyper focused on one thing. And when it comes to organizing the American populace in terms of politics, so we hyper focus on we hyper focus on the presidential election, and that's why we lost every house. That's why we lost every other branch of government, because we hyper focused on the president. We hyper focus on the last 8 months of the 4-year cycle. Let's say we hyper focus on a lot of things, and we sort of choose these very, very specific, very tangible goals that might, sometimes have a lot of meaning and sometimes have no meaning at all. And so I would say it's not as simple as saying we need to come up with a third party and have it viable by 2020 or 2024 or for the next 20 years, next 30 years. We have to come up with various goals, short term, long term, medium term, and come up with a viable strategy to get there, and not just turn off. So from my perspective, I think we are at a ripe time to take over the Democratic Party, at least try to. But at the same time, we don't need to put all our eggs in that basket. We can do multiple things. We have a lot of progressives in state senates all over America. Kashama Sawant, she's a mayor, whatever. Kashama Sawant,
I believe, right?
Pamela Jaya. Okay, I'm gonna slaughter her name. The first Indian American female to be elected to Congress, Pamela Jayapal. But there is opportunity. There's enough room for everything. There's enough room to work on taking over the Democratic Party, and it's also enough room to start working on a third party. You have enough time. There's enough time for both, and we have to be open to doing both if we want to see real change.
Oh yeah, I'm not sold on taking over the Democratic Party. I think that that's something that people have always kind of longed for and tried to do, and that all these people and organizations that came before us, they've all failed, and they failed for a specific reason. Because in the end, when it came time to say, okay, we're not going to change, what are you going to do? Every time the answer is always bow the head. Bernie Sanders did this. We've had people doing this, over and over and over, as far back as the Democrat has been, as far back as the party has been corrupt. People have always been trying to change it, and when they lose, they just fall in line and they let their party affiliation, dictate how they're gonna do their politics ahead of the actual needs of their constituents. Sometimes, the party's wrong, and you need to be able to stand on your own 2 feet and say, no, I'm not going along just because I'm a Democrat. And right now we have a problem where people aren't doing that. They're putting the party affiliation first. And as long as that is still the modus operandi of most people, excuse me, I'm not going to say most, of enough people that the power structure can continue on like that, it's not possible to take it over, because it's going to be able to always pull that card and just say, we're not changing. And if we lose an election, you'll suffer the consequences.
That's true. And I mean, at a certain point, we're held hostage. But like you mentioned, a lot of this is also just in our heads. A lot of the barriers to entry are just in our heads. And that's one of the ways in which the two-party system not only enslaves us structurally, but enslaves us psychologically. Because it's, human beings want to be social. They don't want to, they don't want to be so far outside the mainstream that they can't engage. I do think I agree with you to a certain extent, that I think that the Democratic Party is only going to move so far left, because that's institutional inertia. That's just the way the structure is. So we cannot put all our eggs in that one basket, whether Keith Ellison is the lead of that party or Howard Dean, God forbid, or even Bernie Sanders himself. We have to start, because the two-party system will always trend towards the same thing, I think. So part of that is getting a viable third party ready by, I would say, I think it's reasonable so we can get a third party ready for a presidential campaign, a decent one, by 2030-ish. 2030-ish, we can have a two-party. We can have it would be 2032. We could have, or 2032, 2036, but no one wants to hear that. And that's another barrier, that the Democratic Party already has infrastructure built in. And if you can simply take it over, you can have your way faster. But we have to abandon this short-term mentality and move towards, okay, so, hey, you know what? Maybe we can't have I'm not a big fan of the Green Party right now specifically, but maybe we can't have a third party in a debate by 2020 or 2024 or 2028. But we could have a third party in a debate and even maybe winning, or at least actually disrupting the system and showing the fallacy of electoral college by 2036. That's only 16 years away. I mean, yeah, we have to deal with the muck, but again, that's incrementalism. That's actually moving towards something where you want to be, slowly but surely. Yeah. And I mean, but I will say this: I think that having someone like Bernie Sanders or Keith Ellison as the head of the DNC might speed up a third party integration. It might speed up getting more voices into the debates, because all it really takes is someone like the DNC or the head of the DNC to demand it, and then they can get in. So,
let's address that. I was going to talk about the DNC chair, but I really want to talk about the hidden danger of Donald Trump first, and get that out of the way. No, we already did it. We did it. We hit everything. So let's talk about having Keith Ellison in a DNC. I'm of the opinion it really doesn't matter, not unless he comes out and first off really make some pledges. Number one pledge, they have to disavow corporate money, both him personally as a candidate and the DNC. They just have to stop running off of corporate money. But, so far they really haven't done that. Like, all the stuff that you're talking about doing is just stuff on the edges. And it really, in the grand scheme of things, it won't amount to much, because basically what you're doing here is you're going to change the fixture, but it's all coming from the same pipe. If you were in your house and you had a faucet and you changed the faucet, but there's dirty water coming out of the pipe, no matter how clean that faucet looks on the outside, it's still spewing the same dirty water, because the pipe is the problem, not necessarily the fixture. So when we think about changing people around in the DNC, we need to think about that. Are we changing the fixture, or are we changing the pipe? That's an honest question. That's a question that I put to everybody out there, because to be honest with you, it's my opinion that they're just changing the fixture. And the Democratic Party has become very, very good at doing this. They cloak themselves in the sheen of progress and change, but every time, up underneath all of that, all that rhetoric and grandstanding, it's all just the same old thing.
But you just defined neoliberalism though, right there. It's corporatist policies, anti-statist policies with the thin veil of liberalism, with liberal rhetoric. That's basically why it's called neoliberalism, because it's, you veil these policies, these very, very hurtful policies in neoliberal rhetoric. In liberal rhetoric, good things that sound good, like globalism and the free movement of bodies and all of these things. And I agree with you. I think that we have to be careful. Like, if we are going to trust the DNC, it needs an entire overhaul. We can't just simply replace the head and the entire structure is the same. Basically, everyone involved with what occurred needs to go. Everyone.
I would even expand that. I would even expand that beyond just the DNC. This actually goes for the party itself. A lot of these elected officials need to go. I'm going to be militant out there, and I'm probably alone on this, but anybody that stood with Hillary Clinton and they call themselves a progressive or somebody who represents the needs of working families, they got to go. Maybe they might not need to go today. Maybe, there's somebody that needs to go before them. But at a certain point, unless they fundamentally change where they are, each and every last one of them really does have to go, in my mind. And because in the end, if they really believed in universal health care, why are they up there using their good name and their credibility to funnel people towards somebody who just said that universal health care is impossible and we're not going to do it at all? If you believe in climate change, why did you go up there and stand next to a person that says climate change is off the table? Again, this is just what I'm saying. Lining up what you believe and what you say you believe and your actual actions, putting them in line. If you really believe in those things, you wouldn't be standing next to Hillary Clinton. So my thing is, either you believe in that or you don't. And
I agree.
If you really do believe in it, but you can't follow through, it's the same as not believing at all, because there could be somebody else in that spot that does believe in that will follow through. So I think at a certain point, we have to have that militancy to say, look, we're going to put bold people in there and they're going to be able to stand on their principle and they're going to be able to hold that spot and not just fall in with the party, because we don't need somebody that's just going to go along with the party because the party's corrupt.
Well, I want to double down.
If we're not doing that, we're not going anywhere.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I want to double down on what you just said, or it may take a little bit further. I think that if we're going to have a Keith Ellison or Elizabeth Warren or even a Bernie Sanders, they're going to need to account for why they abandoned progressives in this election. Like they need to account for exactly what you said. Why did you, when it came time to whether it was your not even ideals, because I wouldn't call universal health care or single payer health care or free college for free public universities ideals. I would call them necessary to the functioning of a healthy society. So why were you able to so readily abandon those and functionally abandon not only your base but abandon the American people in terms of what they need, not what they want, but let's be honest, what they need, what we need, and support someone who acknowledges these problems but has no reasonable plan for solving them. And even if they agree to a plan to solve them, you can't really trust them. And I'm going to be honest. If your answer is, well, I was afraid of Trump, that's a bad answer. It's like, that's a bad answer to me. If you're
wait. Let me cut you off and interject with somebody's comment here. They said that's purism, that's too much purism. If your party has nominated Clinton, then you need to stand with that. And you know what? I call that just going along to get along. If your party nominates crap, you just need to stand off in there and get with it. If somebody puts the shit sandwich on your table, you just need to eat it.
If that's the case, then you can understand how Trump got elected, because you cannot make that argument for one party but not for another. So if you make that argument that if your party, no matter who your party elects, you have to go along with it, then I don't think you have any leg to stand on when it comes to Trump, because we're not talking about. We're talking about degrees of difference here. There is substantial difference between them, but not too much. They're both on the same side of the spectrum. They're both incredibly problematic. So if your position is whoever my party elects is who I'm going with, that's strongman politics in one sense. And that's also, then you lose your ability to complain about Donald Trump winning this election or people supporting him in general, because then by your definition, people are allowed to support whoever they're told to support. Like if I'm told to support X, that's just, or am I wrong, Nick? Would you assume?
Yeah, I'm saying, if you really believe and these policies, or you're really representing the needs of your constituents, and they are at odds with the nominee that of the party for which you are a member, what are you going to do? Are you going to put the party affiliation first? Or are you going to put the needs of your constituents first? Because ultimately, that's who you're there for. You're not for that party crap. That party stuff, that really doesn't mean anything. That vote blue, no matter who, that's all garbage. You know, this is not where we're on the same football team. These people are there to represent us or represent constituents. And when the party selects somebody that doesn't represent your constituents, you should have the freedom to say, no, I can't go along with that because my constituents they're not with that. You know, and you shouldn't say, well, you're part of the party, so you have to vote for this person, or you're a purist. No, they're representing their constituents. Their constituents' interests are not with that individual, so they can't do it. That's just what it is. You know, maybe if you want, you can probably give them some sort of concessions or something like of that nature that will maybe they can go to their constituents and it'll be something for them. But that's politics. Someone else brought up that if you want to take over the Democratic Party, you have to take over the precincts because they decide the nominee. That is true, but it actually works in reverse. The party comes down and tells them who the choices for the nominees are going to be, and the precincts just pick the ones that they like. That's really how that works. Now, you can say that the precincts ultimately have the power, but they aren't exercising it. They're not saying, no, party, we're not going to accept these people. We're going to pick somebody else. That's not what they're doing. So that's already dead on arrival with me, as far as saying that you can take over a top-down organization by taking the bottom. Now, when you say the bottom as in the grassroots can do something, it's possible, but the grassroots can't do anything if they don't know how to wield their power correctly. And what I mean by that is saying, number one, the left is not weak. We are not helpless. We are not a minority. The left is very strong. It's a majority. And the reason why I have to say this is because if the left was weak, we would be ignored. There wouldn't be this endless propaganda. I mean, they waste millions upon millions, maybe even billions of dollars. People writing, you have all these intellectuals, you have all these pundits, and all they do is sit there and twist left-wing ideals into some kind of neoliberal idea, or try to downplay the idea of real change and say that this is the best that we can do. They are sitting here manipulating people on the left to say that this is the best we can achieve, and you have to accept it. And they find various ways to sell that. But if we were really weak, they wouldn't need to do that. They would just ignore us altogether. And that's why the left is not weak.
Well, I don't know how weak the left is, but I will say that, like, and this is something I heard from some source, and I agree with it. I'm gonna paraphrase what I heard and put in my own words rather. Is very easily distracted by the wrong things. The left has allowed itself to be confused as to what its true what its true goals should be, as like you so rightly say, Nick, by the right kind of language. The left has been very, very easily confused and made to feel as though it is winning when it's losing, even when it's losing, simply by adopting this position of, well, we won the culture war. You can't say these certain words. America, let's be honest, by all metrics in terms of racial and sexual and equality, has gotten worse since the 60s. It has not gotten better in any way. We've seen very little mobility from within our minority communities. We've seen very little trickle down economics or wealth trickling down from the top 1%. But we've been convinced that somehow the left has won in certain senses. The fact that our politicians can move their mouths in the right way, and a lot of that has to do to misplaced priorities of a lot of the members of the left, and the domination of the conversation by a very, very small percentage of the left, a very small horizontal slice of the left that is incredibly wealthy, incredibly effete, and incredibly insulated from the maldistribution of resources. And so when you see people like Joy-Ann Reid or Jonathan Capehart or any of these,
Van Jones, everybody wants to give Van Jones all this credit, but if you listen to what he's saying, he's basically just another brand, another flavor of the same old thing. This man was fired by Barack Obama because of a right-wing shitstorm, and he sits there, gets some kind of gig on CNN, maybe on the back end, and all he does is sing the praises of Democrats and how they need to do this to be better and how we're winning and how we have to do all these things. But he's never really challenging the system. He had a chance to actually go against the president and say, no, you fired me because it was wrong, and it was wrong of you to do that. And there's a lot of other things that you've gotten wrong, and people would have listened to him. But instead, what does he do? He sits there and complains that Bernie Sanders didn't use a specific type of language that black people are accustomed to hearing from Democrats, and that's why he didn't get enough of the black vote. When, I know it might be unpopular to say this, but at a certain point, can you really lay that at the feet of black people? Like, there are other people that didn't vote for Bernie Sanders. It's not necessarily black people's fault. Now, black people do have a problem in the black community, but that's not something intrinsic to black people. It's intrinsic to people who aren't paying attention or who are unaware of what their economic interests may be in a particular time period. And that's not necessarily confined to one race.
Oh, but I mean, this is you brought up earlier. This is the point your finger game time now. This is the people in power trying to figure out who they can blame that's not them for why Hillary Clinton lost. Because let's be honest, I think a lot of people feel like the establishment Dems didn't learn their lesson, but I question as to whether or not they can learn their lesson. I question whether or not the system exists. They're meant to, like, both mentally and structurally, to allow for them to actually learn any lesson and implement it appropriately. And so what I would say is that within the liberal intelligentsia, the bubble, it does not make sense for Hillary Clinton to lose. It just didn't make any sense. And they structured their math and their reality to reflect that. And, they started celebrating way too early. They considered him not much of a threat. And now they're so awestruck that she could have lost. She was everything the left has been working towards. Right?
But they recovered, though. It's everybody's fault. Like you said, it's everybody's fault but them. Yeah. Everything was right. She was a perfect candidate.
Well, she was a perfect candidate. And I think that was the most off-putting thing to everyone who wasn't in that bubble, that everyone could see she wasn't a perfect candidate. And I think, honestly, had they just admitted that she was flawed, but she was better than Trump, that she had actual flaws. And although, let's be honest, the Clinton machine ran probably the worst campaign versus Trump I've ever seen. And I can't really think of what they did right in terms of messaging, debate, performance, anything. Like, they just, canvassing. She had no ground game. Her entire campaign was very lackluster. But to that bubble, she seemed like a shoo-in.
Well, here's the thing, though.
And
I think a lot of times she didn't want to commit to positions that she may actually be held to. So I think for the most part, she tried to run an issueless campaign and just tried to make sure it was a focus on personality rather than a focus on policy. And that's a big problem with our politics today. Basically they just tried to use what they could, fear. But I think Chris Hedges had a quote. He said, fear engenders a sort of political paralysis where you can't do anything. You can't move forward because everybody's afraid. And I think that's played exactly where we are. Let me let you have the last word. I'm going to close out with some quotes. But I really didn't even have enough time to get to all of what I wanted to talk about. Maybe I'll catch it on the next show.
Okay, well, I mean, we could do this next week if you want to. But what I would say is that you still, you said it right. There's so much fear out there now, and I have to. And we talked about this before the show started. I have to put a lot of that blame on the Democrats. I have to put a lot of the blame for the fear, because I see tweets occasionally from Sean King, from other liberal thinkers, about how the children are afraid, how their pets are afraid, how Muslims are afraid, how other people are afraid. But a lot of this fear was ginned up by the Clinton machine. A lot of this fear. And I don't think it's exactly accurate to say they were presenting Trump one for what he was actually saying or meant to do. And we're talking about stuff like insinuating he was a nuclear holocaust or whatever. So, I mean, when the upper middle class white Dems tell me how afraid they are, I'm like, well, that's really your fault. A lot of that. A lot of that is it was your fear mongering, and you believed your own hype. And now you're being left by the establishment because they're not as afraid as you are. Your Chris Hayes and Chris Matthews are now sucking up. Because it's their job. They're ready to move on, and they've left you afraid and cowering in the dark.
Yeah. So let me go ahead and keep on saying, well, Hillary Clinton had no personality, or she was just the worst candidate they probably could have ever done. She is archetypical of what that party is going to put up. I'm sure if we look back and adjust it for ideological shifts in the electorate, or really the political system, because the electorate has been far to the left of that for a long time, that, Al Gore and John Kerry were not much different. They were kind of in that mold. So when what I want to get out there is that Hillary Clinton isn't an exception. She is the rule. Those type of candidates aren't the exception. That is what this party generates. And so don't expect, moving forward that they're all of a sudden going to change that without, massive upheaval and massive transformation of that party. I'm going to close out with a quote. The first thing I would like to do is say that this is from George Orwell. A people that elect corrupt politicians, imposters, thieves, and traitors are not victims. They are accomplices. Thank you.
Good night.